Anyway, yeah.
He is really, no, he is. He's quiet.
Quiet.
Oh.
This is Devin Foley, and welcome to another episode of First Tuesday Conservatives Countdown to the Election, co-hosted by Alpha News and Charlemagne Institute, of which I am the CEO. We publish Intellectual Takeout and Chronicles magazine. Today we have a phenomenal guest, Kim Crockett, who is currently doing yeoman's work in the battle against election fraud and for integrity in our election system. So this will be probably an eye-opening discussion for many of you, but she wants to make sure too that you do have hope going through it all, so don't get too depressed. So with that, Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Devin.
No problem.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, always happy to have you on. So tell me, Kim, you are up to your neck in alligators right now and fighting the good fight. Start just telling us what you're worried about, why you're engaged so much, why you are working so hard on these projects.
Well, just brief overview. As you and I have discussed many times, and as the audience may have heard you discussing recently, the culture's in tatters. And one of the things I love to say is that John Adams warned us that the Constitution would not save us from ourselves if we were not a moral and religious people. And I think we're seeing the truth of that. Jefferson said, you get the government you deserve, sort of. You elect the government that you choose. So this is why it's so important and why I'm focused so hard, almost singularly on this right now for election 2020. So let me give you the big picture, and I'm just going to talk about Minnesota right now, because it really isn't any way to do justice to what's happening around the country in 30 minutes, but we have plenty of time. And question, are people able to ask us questions at some point in the interview? Or
on this one, we don't have questions, but
you will
follow up and try to be the best audience representative as I can be. So
fantastic.
All right, so let's get into it. What's it look like out there?
Well, big picture is that one of the things I've discovered is that Joan Grow, who was our Secretary of State forever, like in the 80s, 90s, before Mary Kiffmeyer, started this so-called progressive approach to voting. You're a little younger than I am, but Scott Ninsel and others will tell you that, for our introduction to voting, wherever we lived in the country, there was this paper roster, very carefully kept roster, and you had to pre-register to vote. There was none of this, registering on election day, and all the other stuff that we do. Absentee ballots were not a thing, really until this last decade. So that's just a little bit of historical background. And I'm discovering just how progressive Joan Grow was.
So on that topic, just for those of us who are too young, are you saying that
Are you calling me old?
Have weeks of voting ahead of the actual election day and everything going on, that everybody just voted on election day?
We voted on election day.
Amazing. Yeah. The world worked.
It did work. And you know what? There were fewer fights, fewer recounts, fewer messes. And I think there was more confidence in the outcome. So when your guy lost, you said, okay, I need to make a better pitch next time, or that was fair, which isn't to say there hasn't always been voter fraud. There always has been, and there always will be. But I think the process was better. How we get that toothpaste back in the tube, remains to be seen. So big picture in Minnesota, we've had 2 progressive secretaries of state. Our current one is Steve Simon, who was an aggressive legislator before he became secretary in 2014. And then I'm having a blank on the name of the guy that was before him. It'll come to me. So we've had a decade plus of really progressive secretaries, and the legislature's kind of shifted around so that our election laws have changed quite a bit, so that now we have 6 weeks, 46 days of voting in Minnesota, with a hard push toward absentee ballots versus election day voting, which is really the most secure way for you to vote. And so for those of you who are listening, I don't want to discourage you. I actually want to give you some good news. We still have something called direct balloting that begins tomorrow on October 27th, Tuesday the 27th, where most people can take a ballot that they either ordered or can pick up and feed it into a balloting, a tabulating machine, so that there's less between you and the count of your vote. And you can do that on Halloween from about 10 in the morning till about 3 in the afternoon. And then again, Monday the 2nd and Tuesday the 3rd. So keep that in mind, because my overall messaging to your audience is, don't rush out and vote this afternoon. Starting tomorrow, you have an opportunity to narrow down some of the mischief that I'm going to talk about.
And on that, not to take us down the rabbit hole of mischief, but my wife.
We're gonna go there.
Yeah, my wife had said we should vote early, and I said, when we thought about it, talked about it, and I said, well, if we vote early, then if there's voter fraud, the people doing the counting are going to know how many votes they've got. They'll have a better sense of how many votes they've got to, find out there. Is that, am I crazy, or?
That's not crazy thinking.
All right.
And all I have to say, and I'll be nonpartisan, is that it's the progressive wing of the DFL and the Democrats that have been pushing this new way of voting. But the Republicans have also said, well, we better get on that bandwagon because we want to have our people in voting too. And I just think overall, it's a bad idea. It introduces so many variables between you and the proper count of your vote. The policies of this secretary and the one preceding him and the Democrat Party, which has been in charge of the Secretary of State's office for quite some time, favors city voters over metro voters. It favors metro voters and city voters certainly over the rural vote. This is something that this is kind of a sleeper issue that's I've kind of woken up to, if you will.
This is the first I've ever heard of this. So tell us, how do they favor it? How do they pull the levers of power in a way that benefits the urban core?
Well, aside from Zuckerberg money that's coming into cities like Minneapolis, and we should try to find a few minutes to talk about Zuckerberg money through a nonprofit that's doing Get Out the Vote in Minneapolis and other progressive towns. The secretary has been pushing, this early absentee voting, right? You hear all about it. Voting centers in the city. You can't, turn around without bumping into one. Boxes. These were the subject somewhat of the Project Veritas videos that came out. And it's push for all this voting, make it as convenient as possible. We'll come and get you from your home and carry you over. Practically, I'm being sarcastic, but big push for voting in the cities. The metro area still has a lot of options for voting. Not quite as many as the cities because they don't have as many drop boxes and early voting centers and those sorts of things. But that's not a bad thing. So don't feel sorry for yourself if you don't have those options. We have to eliminate them, actually, I think, in the future in the cities. In rural Minnesota, since 2014, we've had a massive increase in precincts closing. So there are over 4,000 precincts in Minnesota. since 2014, where there were 588 mail-in precincts in small cities and townships, there are now 1,435 precincts that have gone to mail only. That's a name, so stop. It doesn't mean you have to use the mails. It just means they are strong. They're making it really hard for you not to. So that's how there's actually a suppression, in my opinion, of the rural vote here in Minnesota. Just since 2018, 75,000 new registered voters are now in one of these mail-in precincts. Well, what does that mean? Sounds kind of good, actually. If I'm a registered voter and I live in outstate in one of these precincts, and by the way, the township or the city chooses this. It's not that it's imposed on them, though I don't know how much.
So it's your local leaders who are going along with this.
Right, it's your local leaders. So if you're ticked off about this, that's who you want to go to. Though I suspect there's been some carrot and stick work with these local leaders by the secretary. So if I'm a registered voter in one of these mail-in precincts, I get a ballot in the mail. Sounds great, right? I don't have to order an absentee ballot. I don't have to go to the polls. I can just sit at the kitchen table and talk to my friends about, well, who are these judges, or, you know, whatever. Fill it out and put it back in the mail. What's wrong with that? You tell me.
I can imagine a lot of things that are wrong with that, quite honestly. And I find it fascinating that that's happening, because usually, you know, folks like you who are fighting for election, you know, integrity, it's usually the argument that's used often against conservatives and other folks who, and people moderates who want tighter rules, is always that we are the ones wanting to suppress the vote. So I find it fascinating that it's actually the rural that's perhaps being suppressed.
Oh, I think that's a fair conclusion here. Now that and as I said, this was a little bit of a sleeper issue that I woke up to, you know, just over the last couple of weeks, where I realized the number of, and this happened because friends of mine live in one of these precincts, and they were like, what is this? They're very intelligent people too, but they got this letter telling them that their precinct would be closed and that they would be receiving a ballot in the mail, which they could then fill out and just drop back into the mail. And they thought, we don't want to do that. And so the phone calls and the emails began, and I started looking into it and discovered this massive increase. So just since 2018, there's been a 42% increase in the number of precincts. And there were about 600 of them when Simon came into office. And those 600 that he inherited had been added just since 1987. This is a Joan Grow progressive, I think, start of suppressing the outstate vote in Minnesota. You know, why would we apply cost efficiencies, right, to outstate Minnesota on voting when it is a fundamental function of the government? It's one of the most important things that your local city does, your small city, your staff. Townships, I kind of get, because there's generally no staff. Townships are trickier. And here's just a little bit more about that, and then we can go on to other areas that I'm concerned about. If someone is not registered to vote in one of these mail-in precincts, it's crickets. They don't exist. They don't get the letter. They don't get a ballot. They don't even know, unless they read a little ad in the paper or hear it from a friend, that the precinct they thought they could go to isn't going to be open. And everyone is assigned to a central polling location. And I talked to the Secretary of State's office in Greater Minnesota this morning. Some of these are an hour away from where people live.
Are you kidding? Really?
Yeah.
So if I'm just, Joe Blow, and I know, okay, the election's coming up, I always vote, I always go to the same precinct location.
Well, no, you
I
would be
walk
Joe
in,
Blow who hadn't voted in the last two federal
fair
elections, so
enough.
you went
Okay.
to inactive status, or maybe you're Joe Blow who moved to another precinct, but
Mm.
in the same general area, and you kind of knew where the precincts were.
So
So
basically, people who have already, that are registered and have already voted in the past, they at least learn about this. But
if they
people who,
in their stack of all this election stuff, that's
right,
another topic, right?
right.
I mean, have you guys been getting just like every day you get this stuff? It looks very official.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it did some standard direct mail game to do that. But
Yeah.
so,
How do
so,
I tell that that's a ballot? I mean, how do
right.
I, if I'm
So,
just a regular person and I'm getting all this stuff in the mail every day, how the hell do I distinguish a ballot, which has been mailed to me that somebody can use and vote and turn in, from all the other stuff coming in? So yeah.
so I could have just, moved to the area. I could have just graduated from high school or college, and I'm in the area.
Right.
I may not have engaged previously in the last few federal elections, but I now want to do, my civic duty. And if I wait to the last minute, thinking that I can just look up the precinct, on November 2nd in the evening, I'm in trouble.
Well, you could be, right. And this is why actually I wrote a whole thing on it at Minnesota Voters Alliance that people can find on the front page. This is why I want people to know they need to plan ahead. And that's true wherever we vote, but especially for outstate voters. So if you're listening and you think you might be in one of those, go to the poll finder on the Secretary of State's website, put in your address and find out if you're affected by it. And I'm talking with someone from the Zumbro Goodhue area on my radio show this weekend about this very topic, because it's an hour drive. And also, as I said, that's what the Secretary of State's very nice woman, by the way, today. The people I talked to on the phone, they're great. The website's out of date too. Tells you have to have a witness to register on election day if you're not registered yet, and it's actually not true. So the website's wrong. But let's go to the big
Yeah, I
picture.
was going to say, that's one big giant issue that's
I just
new,
think
even to me. I mean, I think that's critical to get out there. So folks, if you're listening or you have friends who are in greater Minnesota, talk to people, give your friends a call, shoot an email, let them know that the whole way of going about voting has changed. So that's
and
good.
I think Alpha News is going to put up a little op-ed
Okay.
that Andy Silic and I did. Nice little short one that you can share. It should be up on Alpha News either today or tomorrow.
Perfect.
And then we're hoping the Forum Communications Papers is going to carry it too. I've been begging them for like a week. Please, this is like a public service announcement, right?
Oh, it really is. So what else though is going out there? I mean, you'd mentioned the Project Veritas videos.
Well,
They're absolutely horrifying. So a lot of us are now, we're suspicious, we're worried, we're concerned. And
right.
so tell us what else is going on.
Well, and so the other side of the rural vote suppression is this big push for the progressive inner city vote, where of course you have the most populous cities, and within Hennepin, the most populous counties. And one of the things, I don't want to go into a lot of detail on it, but Zuckerberg and other tech CEOs who have more money than God, have started something called the Center for Technology and Civic Life, CTCL, and they're dropping hundreds of millions of dollars on cities that went 75% for Hillary Clinton in 2016 to get out the vote. Well, the problem with that is that the city of Minneapolis, which has been given a $3 million grant, cannot offer itself to be commandeered by a nonprofit to get out the vote. Imagine if the National Rifle Association, the NRA, said, let's commandeer the get out the vote apparatus in outstate Minnesota. Well, heads would blow off shoulders, and they'd be like, "You can't do that."
Oh yeah.
Right. It just smells to high heavens. And just when you think you understand their game, they try these new things. So Minnesota Voters Alliance and other election integrity groups in 4 or 5 states are suing to stop this and to challenge Mr. Zuckerberg. He and his wife just dropped another, $100 million on this a week or so ago. Just huge checks. And Wisconsin's getting hit particularly hard, like 5 cities with, tens of millions of dollars being spent. So there's that. But the big picture that I want to get to is that we're expecting about 3 million votes. There's like 3.5 million registered voters in Minnesota right now, and we're expecting as many as 3 million votes, because there's normally about 2.9 million in a presidential election year. Okay. And a good chunk of those are going to be absentee ballots this time, not just because of COVID, or as we call it, the Wuhan flu. It's because there's been this campaign. There's been a steady increase in absentee ballots every year since we kind of started this at the beginning of the I suppose it would have been about a decade ago. Okay. But it's really up this year. It's been pushed super hard, and with all the precinct closings and outstate, of course, that increases it there as well. So after the 2008 Coleman-Franken debacle, when Norm Coleman was the U.S. Senator and Al Franken wanted to be the U.S. Senator, there was this clash that ended with Coleman going to sleep that night thinking he was going back to the Senate, when in fact it ended up in recount territory. And this guy named Mark Elias, who's just a DNC, Democratic National Committee powerhouse lawyer with a group called the Democracy Project, swept in, and took about 8 months, but boy, they found the 312 votes they needed to send Mr. Franken to the U.S. Senate.
So now Mark Elias, where is he based out of?
DC. So where all creatures live.
Yeah, so DC, and then he comes in to help make sure the vote counting goes the right way.
He's the king of recounts. So after that happened, where everybody had to admit that was a messy, embarrassing episode in our electoral history, the legislature passed a bill that required ballot boards for absentee ballots to be manned by someone from the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, the major parties. Just like when you walk into a precinct on election day, there's a Republican judge and a Democrat judge. They struggle in Minneapolis to find them, but they ship them in from Edina.
Yeah, get checks and balances. And maintains integrity, hopefully. That's the
and believe it or not, some amazing friendships, because that's it. Like the time when we work together and we make sure things are cricket and we do a good job. Well, the ballot boards are supposed to be run the same way. Well, now that Simon has pushed for and won a 46-day election season, and he's extended that too, and I'm looking at the time here, and we're gonna have to speed it up and talk about that. But a normal election year, we'd have 46 days of voting with absentee ballots. It makes it really hard. I'm not defending it, but it makes it hard for the counties and the cities to find people to work the ballot boards from the major parties, because they have to find, sort of citizen election judges.
Right.
Well, I had an op-ed in the Star Tribune a week ago today that talks about how the Senate had testimony from Hennepin County saying just that. Hey, it's too hard to follow the law. And so we don't. We just hire the people we want to for that 46 days. And besides, Ginny Helms, the head of the election stuff there, said, we don't have to because the Secretary of State made it optional. Following the law is now optional in Hennepin County. Minneapolis has followed it, and almost every other county that we're aware of here in Minnesota. We've got one county that's trying really hard to follow the law, and it's Ramsey County. So when the absentee ballots come in, and they had about 150,000 of them when I visited them last Thursday, they had Republicans and Democrats sitting across from each other, working through the piles, and they've been working on it for weeks. Wow. But in Hennepin County, Minneapolis, and just about any other county in the state you'd name, one exception being Olmsted, which is Rochester, they're trying to comply. You have a complete lawlessness going on with the count of absentee ballots in the state of Minnesota.
Now, is there legal pushback against that?
There is, and there's more coming. The Republican Party dropped its appeal when it of a couple of things because of some Supreme Court decisions, and I don't have enough time to go into them. Okay. But the U.S. Supreme Court said a while back that it didn't really want to get involved in state law issues unless there was a federal issue. But yeah, there's a ton of litigation going on. So let me just make this even more interesting. So we have that 46 days. We have absentee ballot boards, hundreds of thousands, 1 million plus coming in, right, over the next few weeks. Last summer, Secretary Simon extended the time that we're going to count absentee ballots. It's already a 46-day voting period. Congress and the state of Minnesota set November 3rd as election day. In a consent decree with Mark Elias, who's this DNC activist, he agreed to two things mid-July. Number one, we would not require witness signatures anymore on absentee ballots because of COVID. It was just too dangerous to ask absentee ballot voters to get a witness that they are who they say they are, either another registered voter or a notary. And we've been requiring that for years. That got waived for COVID. And the big one was this extension. So ballots can come in, Devin. And the idea was that they'd be postmarked November 3rd, but could be counted until November 10th. But in the consent decree, it says if they don't have a postmark on them, but they arrive by November 10th, the presumption is that they were postmarked.
Are you serious?
On election day.
It's just.
I have to tell you, get the tissue out. I want to cry, but I don't have time. No. Like, I want to stop and cry when I learn these
things. Head hasn't exploded yet. I would have just been, yeah.
I did go take a walk earlier today because I found out something else. But this is crazy.
Yeah, the abuses, and I'm not.
This is voting.
People are
voting.
Yeah, people are fallen people. It doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican. It's like the temptation to want to help your guy get over the, win the vote is a strong temptation for some people. And this doesn't seem to have what you're describing is something that is fraught with opportunities to be tempted to do something for the betterment of your team.
Right. In this year especially, I think people are feeling self-righteous and they'll say it's okay to cheat.
Right.
Because I'm feeling self-righteous about my party and my candidate.
Yeah, the country's on the line.
The country's on the line, so I can cheat.
Yeah, if my guy doesn't win, the country's going to collapse, so it's okay. It's for the greater good.
Right. So I've told your listeners a lot of things, and let me just conclude my part by saying thank you. But also, do you see why I want you to vote in person? If you can go and do direct balloting with an absentee ballot starting tomorrow, great. Just call your city hall. You can do it all week long. You can do it on Halloween, short kind of banker hours. You can go Monday, and then you can also go to your precinct. And all those rural voters also have a live election day precinct somewhere. So make it a party. You know, if it's far away, grab a friend, go and vote. Don't let me discourage you. I want you to experience righteous anger over what I've told you today, but don't let it defeat you. And then let's ask, Steve Simon and his party why they wouldn't be more interested in a system of voting that ensures integrity. So when we all wake up, whenever this is over, and see, it won't be over in Minnesota on November 3rd. When it is over, we go, okay, that was a fair result. We can't do that, Devin, this year because of all of this invitation to fraud. I'm tired of calling it shenanigans or mischief. This is an invitation to fraud and chaos.
It is. And I think the worst is if people lose trust in the integrity of our electoral system, all bets are off. I mean, at a certain point, if no one trusts the system, or very few trust the system, we're already a fractured country right now.
Right.
But that pushes us much, much further or farther down that road. And, once trust is lost, it's not easy to get back. So what does it look like as far as your expectations for legal battles and things of this nature after the election?
There will be legal battles. I mean, there's already lawsuits, coming and going. I can't even keep track of all of them. And more are being filed this week. We'll see what happens. One of the things about elections is that once they're over, even if we don't believe the count, they're kind of over.
Right.
It's very hard for judges to undo things. So you don't want to be in that position, but the litigation will, whether it's here or other states, and it will be somewhere in the country probably. It'll be around recount and proper procedures and kind of a Bush v. Gore times whatever.
Well, and the Bush v. Gore, for our listeners and viewers, I know you know this story, but I was actually helping the Secretary of State Mary Kiffmeyer when she was running for re-election, 2006, if I recall correctly. And I was just doing fundraising and help on that in the evenings. And we got a hold of a letter that came from some, it was, for instance, I think it was Democrat Committee for Secretaries of State or something like that. It was an organization put together solely to put money behind secretaries of state, Democratic candidates for Secretary of State. And they were very specific on the letters they were sending. Yeah. We need to make sure that we have the right people in office so that Bush v. Gore doesn't happen again. We need to make sure that we have our people who are basically putting the vote counting in motion. And I remember showing it to potential donors and others, and it was, quite honestly, at the time, it was poo-pooed. It was sort of...
Well, that's how we got Mark Ritchie. I told you I'd remember his name.
Yeah, there you go. Mark Ritchie won that election.
That's how we got Mark Ritchie. The amount of money that came into that process was, huge. And that's what happened with Ellison as well. It was that big national push where you had all this national and international, frankly, money to come in and get these offices because it controls the process. And I'll tell you, I'll take honest old school Democrats I need them to rise up and rebel and say, this isn't right. We want to win, but we want to win fair and square.
Right.
And my challenge to them is, where are you?
Yeah, even the old school progressives in Minnesota, it wasn't long ago, and I've been in Minnesota for about 20 years now, but it always struck me that during the first half of that, the first decade or so, up to Mark Ritchie or so, that it was always done with a lot of honor, that the election itself was kind of sacrosanct, and they, for the most part, on both sides, everybody wanted a good, honest, trustworthy election. And that just seems to have gone completely out the window
Yep.
with the culture changes that have been taking place. It's just sort of will to power now, where people, all that matters is the outcome.
Right. And that's not who we are as a country.
No.
So, I mean, if I could paint a happy scenario, maybe there's enough states still operating with integrity so that the national outcome, those offices are decided quickly and decisively. But that doesn't do a lot for us here in Minnesota with our, even our U.S. Senate candidates, our congressional candidates, local offices. It just throws everything into doubt. And what you're pointing to is that, we're supposed to be a self-governing people, but without that fundamental confidence in our election process, it's very hard to do that. And so I think this has to be a really number one focus.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. So any other, again, with the Project Veritas and the appearance of perhaps literally buying votes and things of that nature, can you tell us a little bit about that episode and any other concerns out there? And then I do want to get to what you're hopeful for and what you're out, optimistic on, or at least, hopeful about. But I look at the Project Veritas. I mean, is that taking place?
Oh, yes, and Matt Tiermond, whom you and I both know and enjoyed seeing recently, he was here in town. I had him come on my radio show and talk about how Fox 9 News attacked the veracity of the Project Veritas videos. It was a really crazy assault, not very fact-filled, we might say. The Project Veritas videos, the James O'Keefe work, stands up very well to scrutiny. And you can go to their website and watch, I'm very contained. James O'Keefe is just, the head's blowing off the show. I'm going to sue the New York Times. I'm going to sue Fox 9. Bless him for all of his energy, go get him. Because they did good work here. What they revealed was a pattern of ballot harvesting. In those videos, the focus was on the Somali refugee community in Minneapolis, in the 5th Congressional District, where Ilhan Omar is poised. This will be, if she wins, it would be her second term. It feels like her first term has gone on forever and ever, because of course she's part of the AOC squad and all of that.
Well, she's always in front of, she's always making news.
Right. So I call it the fraud squad. And I loved Project Veritas and the work that they did. They had incontrovertible video evidence of ballot harvesting in Minneapolis that was from the primary, and sort of top down Ilhan Omar staff enforcing this, paying for votes, those kinds of things. Though it's interesting in the video that her primary opponent was also allegedly paying for votes, but they'd say, oh, we'd take his money, but then we'd go vote for Ilhan. Really. So a swindle on the swindler. Who knows if that's true, right? But what I always wanted to know, and I actually didn't get a chance to find out, is did they see evidence of ballot harvesting that went beyond that particular immigrant community, where you have, and I think there is. I mean, there's a guy named Omar Jamal who's cited. He's the whistleblower, works for Ramsey County. He said it went beyond the Somali immigrant community. It was DFL policy, basically, is what he said in the video. And I've been trying to get in touch with him. I'd love to talk with him. I haven't succeeded at that, but I suspect it does. Now,
so how was the Fox 9 article wrong?
Well, one of the key points that they made was that this gentleman, he's shown in the video driving around. It's all about the ballots.
Yeah. Look at him run my dash and everything, which was horrifying, but yeah.
Yeah. And it was horrifying. He had ballots all over his car, and he's just having a grand old time and just cranking it out because $200 a pop, right? Fox 9 said, well, he really only had 20.
What is the significance of 20?
Well, it still violates the law. Let's suppose that it really was just 20 ballots.
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota law only allows you to harvest, if you will, pick up ballots for someone else. You can only do it for 3 people. So if you want to go out and help, little old ladies or someone in your family or your neighborhood who can't get to the polls, you can do that for 3 people. And there's a process you have to go through. They have to fill out a form. It's an assistance form to make sure that, we're not doing harvesting, which is legal, by the way, in California. And how what they say, if it's happening in California, it's coming here next. It's just a matter of time. So that was one of the issues that Mark Elias came into Minnesota and sued on through the democracy docket. He had, interest groups sue the Secretary of State saying it's unconstitutional to limit people, community, what do they call them? Community organizers or something like that should be able to go in and pick up ballots. And they also challenged limitations on our voter assistance for people who are disabled or can't speak English. Yes, we have had for a long time now under federal law, people who are illiterate who are allowed to vote. That's been a thing for quite some time. The Minnesota Supreme Court said, you're right, we're not going to limit how much you can assist people who are unable to read the ballot. You can help as many people as you want, but we're going to limit you to 3 people in terms of actually bringing ballots to. So now we have to rely on this process that I've described to you for having the integrity to keep track of you. Devin, maybe you're a ballot harvester, maybe on the side, you're working as a ballot harvester. How do we keep track of that? And what I'm hearing is that some counties are asking you for identification and keeping track of you when you come in with the ballots, and others aren't.
Okay.
So effectively, we have ballot harvesting going on in Minnesota as well. And let me just say, all those vulnerable immigrants, they don't know. Some guy comes in and says, Grandma, give me your identification. I'm going to order an absentee ballot for you. And he knows when the ballot's coming, and he goes and he takes it from her and he fills it out and brings it in. She doesn't know. And he says, that's how we do it here. What does she know? Or it's so intimidating that she goes, okay.
Right.
And maybe she goes and votes again on election day. I don't know. I've worked those precincts. It's pretty wild. It's pretty chaotic. Where people, there's very little English spoken. And I think it goes beyond that community, though. I really do. I think this is something that's been growing in our culture, where we have a sense of lawlessness and who cares? It's all about the result, as you said.
Yeah,
and I would love to see that, I would love to see that documented in the future with a similar undercover project. That'd be great.
So on the, in the short term, we're just about a week out from the election day, the official election day. And you said that they can, that they'll still be accepting absentee ballots up until the 11th, was it?
The 10th.
The 10th. Okay.
Yeah, they're supposed to be postmarked by November 3rd.
Okay.
But if they're not, there's language that actually says there's a presumption that it was postmarked, unless there's a preponderance of evidence to the contrary, whatever that means.
Got it.
And part of it is that prepaid mail doesn't get a postmark from the U.S. Postal Service. This is why I want you to go vote in person. Just don't be involved in any of this stuff, folks. Go
vote. But then for those who do want to help and make sure that in some small way or a really big way that they contribute to the integrity of our electoral system, what can a person do between now and either the 3rd or the 10th? Are there opportunities for people to get involved and to do things, no matter which side of the political aisle you're on? But if you want to make sure that the votes are counted and it's done properly, what can a person do?
Well, whichever side of it you're on. And we do have 2 other major parties here that are marijuana. One's a Cannabis Now or Marijuana Now. There's 2 cannabis parties, but
today
we aren't encouraging them to be part of ballot counting.
Okay. If they care about it, who knows? So
they didn't submit any lists to the Secretary of State. So what normally happens is people sign up through their major party, and the party, hands over those people who volunteered to be election judges, poll challengers, election lawyers.
Can people still register to take a part in those?
Yeah, we're sort of past the deadlines on it, but the fact is help is still needed. And because of these lawsuits that I'm referring to, that I'm aware of, there may be big opportunities to serve starting November 4th, hopefully sooner, but that's just a week from now. But that 7 days of ballot counting, we're hoping to break through legally with some case between now and then, or just win the argument with the election officials that if they want to be proud of the result and have people confident about it, they need to hire Democrats and Republicans to sit down with those ballots that come in, postmark or no postmark. Maybe we have to live with that, and check everything over. There's a 6-point checklist for these absentee ballots before they get fed into the tabulator.
Okay.
And emotionally prepare yourself, mentally prepare yourself in Minnesota that we're not going to have a result on November 3rd.
Okay.
The country might, the nation might. It might be an overwhelming or close enough or whatever, but Minnesota, because unless this consent decree is overturned, there is a case before the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals tomorrow morning. 2 Republican electors, Eric Lucero, who's a state representative, and Jim Carson, who is a CD4 Republican elector, have sued to push back the deadline to 8 p.m. November 3rd. and they're suing under Article 2 of the Constitution, saying if the Secretary of State gets his way and extends this to November 10th, Minnesota might get left out of the Electoral College process.
Right.
Because we won't be ready.
No, I can imagine if this, we have already experienced this, whether, multiple times now in my short, well, long, but 2 decades being in Minnesota. We've seen this.
Thanks for putting up with us.
I'm here. But I mean, we've seen it multiple times. I mean, you have the Coleman, and then you had Emmer as well, where it was a really, really tight race.
Yep, 2010, Emmer Dayton.
Right. So this is a huge issue. What would you say? And we've got about 10 minutes left or so. So I want to.
Sorry, I thought we were wrapping up at 2:30. I'm like, sure, I can talk about this all day long. But
no. You are just a well of fascinating information that we.
Yeah, I hope it's not depressing.
No, it is. I think it just. There's a part of it where it is depressing, but where I'm actually going, and I would hope that a lot of the listeners and viewers are going, is what do we need to do to fix this? I mean, what policies, what changes do you recommend so that we can have more trust in the electoral process?
Well, I think, we started off the conversation with the model that worked. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot's happened since everybody voted on election day. But we also are, as Americans, we're kind of in love with technology. We're in love with, new and improved, even if it really isn't improved. And I think with voting, that's probably very much the case. I mean, the next step, your kids, you've got teenagers, right? I've got millennials. They're going to want to vote on their phone.
Right. Which seems
fraught. Like, why do I have to? What is this? They'll be like, what is this paper? Yeah. I have to go somewhere?
Do we need to do the purple thumb like the Iraqis or whatever? I mean, that's almost where my mind goes. It's right. It is. Right. How do we do this properly?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is roll back the 46-day early voting, and certainly find a way to interrupt this these extensions. I mean, the extension took place before there was even a problem.
Got it.
Back in July. And I can see where this year we might have had a lot of ballots, and we might have had to cry uncle and say, because we're following our good ballot board procedures, we need a couple extra days. So be patient. We'll get to you. We'll 2 or 3 days. We're going to, do this right. But we certainly don't need 46 days to put pressure on the system where you can't have those citizen election judges. I think citizen election judges on the ballot boards, observing the count, they should be present in every step of the process. It's not a time for experts. And most of the experts are members of public sector unions, which are leftist extensions of the DNC, so they're not neutral. We have to get back to a process that's short, probably 7 days of absentee voting. I wouldn't go back to the system where you had to have an excuse to vote. Like the dog ate my paper equivalent. I need to be gone for work, or it's so just too hard.
You wouldn't go back to that requirement?
I think that's too big a shift. Too much toothpaste to get back into the tube. I could be wrong, but that's what it used to be. And some states still require you to have an excuse. But if you think about it, it's kind of like a doctor's note for work. I don't know. We're adults. And I think people just made stuff up. It wasn't enforceable, and laws that aren't enforceable draw the contempt of its citizenry.
Right.
So I would shorten it up to, 7 days, or maybe, the Tuesday before the election. You can vote by absentee, whether, and I would discourage the use of the mails completely. It's not a proper vehicle for the delivery. Would you put, how much money would you put in the mail? Would you mail a lottery check?
No. I mean, I'd keep it at that limit of, $25-$50 for.
Yeah, what are you willing to lose?
Graduation gift or a birthday gift, but that's about it.
Right. So I would get away from the whole idea of mailing ballots. In the states like Oregon and Washington that have been doing mail-in voting for years, and they've kind of perfected it, they have very tight deadlines on when things can happen, so that there's tons of time between when things can arrive and when they get counted. And what's interesting about those states is that most of the voters still drive their ballot to City Hall.
No kidding.
Yeah. I've been learning a lot, Devin. They're like, no, I'm not putting it in the mail. And the shrinkage rate at this last primary for 2020 around the country, when people put things in the mail, was between 1 and 10%. So 1 to 10% of the absentee ballots just went poof. Never got counted, or they showed up after the election and couldn't be counted. That's amazing. And it's
10% is that's enough to swing a vote or an election.
Oh, 1% is enough.
Wow.
So if we're really serious about having a proper inventory of ballots and knowing what really happened, also acknowledging that it's going to be some cheating because people are just really good at that around the edges. You don't have any mail.
Human nature.
Limit it to,
It's human nature. There are always people that are nefarious, which is why you have to have checks and balances and good systems in place that can recognize that, there may be some bad apples that get through, but the checks and balances and the procedures should be able to limit or stop the damage that they could do.
Right. They should be very much at the edges so that when we wake, there should be an election day.
Yep.
And then when we wake up, we go, okay. And if it's close, we know it's close because the people were divided closely, not because of fraud. And then there's a procedure laid out for that. Going back to Franken and Coleman in 2008, he wasn't seated. That election was in November. He wasn't seated in the U.S. Senate until July.
Right, I recall that, and it made things a bit messy.
Right, and I think it was the only U.S. Senate race that was up in the air at that point. But there's always this debate over whether he was the needed vote for passing Obamacare.
That's it. Yep, I remember that.
Right. And then the guy from Pennsylvania, Alan Specter, was that his name?
Yeah.
He flipped parties.
Right. I remember.
So that complicated things too. But these things have massive consequences for our country.
No, they really do. So we are bottom of the hour. We've got about a minute and a half left or so. Actually, top the hour. But you said you don't want to leave people too depressed. You want to give them hope. So tell us how we should have hope moving forward, or why.
Well, I think as conservatives, we need to grow up a little bit. And, we all get really excited about get out the vote stuff and helping candidates and all of that. And I think we're just as enamored of the new and improved problem with voting. I think we need to get over that. We need to slap ourselves and say, okay, that's not working terribly well. And spend some political capital fixing this at the state level, and also explore ways where Congress might step in because it's so dangerous. I believe in federalism, but this may be a time when, for example, one of the few federal laws I would love in this area is that you have to have a photo identification to vote. If you're in the United States, we use photo ID, for example.
I was going to ask you about that. I just was worried we didn't have the time. So,
well, we haven't even gotten to all the vouching rules, the mess that we create on election day itself with our sloppy. Joan Grow, again, is the one who started that. Mark Ritchie and Simon really brought it in. But, I remember working a precinct a while back where a guy walks in his PJs. His hair was a mess too. A guy did not gotten dressed. He just rolled out of bed. Maybe he was being paid to be there. I don't know. And he had no identification on him. And this little chippy, it turns out she was from MoveOn.org, comes up to vouch for him. And he was able to vote. And I looked at that and I just thought, that's really strange. And after she had done that with a number of people, I looked at her. I was standing behind the table, and I looked at her, and I looked at the head election judge, and I said to her, the little chippy from MoveOn.org, "You're a liar. I don't believe you. You don't know any of these people. You don't live in this neighborhood, and you shouldn't be vouching." And off she went out the door. So one of the things we have to be is brave. And stand up for the integrity of our system. And then just get out there. And if you've already voted, just let it go. It's nothing you can do about it. But take someone else. And there are people who are feeling vulnerable right now, but that's true every election year. It's not just during this lockdown. If there are people at church or in your family or in your neighborhood who maybe can't get to the polls, we have curbside voting in Minnesota. Wow. Did you know that? You can pull up in your car and there's this area for curbside voting. There's a number you call and the judges come out to your car, the Republican and the Democrat, and they say, "Well, hello, Mr. Foley, you're not feeling well today." And they bring you a ballot and you fill it out. And then they make sure together that they bring it in and feed it into the tabulator. And maybe they come out and give you your sticker. I don't know.
My goodness.
But we even have curbside voting, which I think is fantastic. We take care of one another that way. And that's on election. That's election day.
Okay. Well, Kim, thank you so much for, first of all, of course, fighting the good fight for election integrity and just putting yourself out there as a warrior for that. And we thank you for everything that you're doing and everybody else out there. And this was very illuminating. So
big shout out to Andy Sillick, whom I've learned a ton from. I can't keep up with them. He's the Energizer Bunny of voting integrity in Minnesota. And I'm in his wake.
So for folks out there who may want to do something or get involved, you can reach out to your political party. You could probably also reach out to Andy Sillick and Kim and Minnesota Voters Alliance and other groups. So do that if you want to get involved. This has been a phenomenal episode of First Tuesday Conservatives Countdown to the Election, co-hosted by Alpha News and Charlemagne Institute, of which I'm the CEO. Charlemagne publishes Intellectual Takeout as well as Chronicles Magazine, and you can join us as a member if you like. Upcoming, we are packing in the interviews from here until the election. So later tonight, 6:30 Central, we have Father Altman, who will be doing a speech. Yeah, he'll be talking to us. And then we have Senator Roger Chamberlain later in the night after that. So that's the lineup for this evening. And we've got a bunch more tomorrow and every day except for Saturday. So tune in, keep an eye on your emails to get updates. And we look forward to having you join us again for the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.